I want to start with something almost everyone has experienced, but rarely talks about. You leave a conversation. Nothing dramatic happened, no argument, no obvious mistake. And yet, your mind doesn't let it go. You replay it, what you said, what they said, how they reacted. Then it changes. What did they mean by that? Did I say too much? Did I miss something? And before you realize it, you're not remembering the conversation anymore. You're rebuilding it, adding meaning, adding possibilities, trying to figure something out. And the more you think, the more it feels like there's something to find, something important. So let's talk about it. Why you replay conversations in your head, and why it's so hard to stop. The first reason is simple. Your brain is trying to understand. Humans are social, which means your brain is constantly asking, did that interaction go well? Was I accepted? Am I safe here? And conversations are full of subtle signals, tone, pauses, facial expressions, things that aren't always clear in the moment. So after the conversation ends, your brain keeps processing, trying to fill in the gaps. The second reason is uncertainty. If everything in a conversation feels clear, you move on. But if something feels slightly off, even a small detail, your brain holds onto it because uncertainty feels unfinished, and your mind doesn't like unfinished things, so it loops. Not because it wants to annoy you, but because it's trying to resolve something. The third reason is control. Replaying a conversation creates the illusion that you can fix it. If I understand what happened, I can do better next time. I can avoid mistakes. So your brain goes over it again and again, not because it can change the past, but because it wants to feel prepared for the future. The fourth reason is self-awareness. You don't just experience conversations. You observe yourself inside them, how you sound, how you come across, how you're perceived, and that creates a second layer of thinking. Not just, what happened? But, what does this say about me? And that question goes much deeper. The fifth reason is emotional sensitivity. If something in that conversation triggered a feeling, even a small one, your brain holds on to it. Not the words, the feeling. Because emotions signal importance. So your mind keeps returning to it, trying to understand why it mattered. The sixth reason is pattern recognition. Your brain is always looking for patterns. If something in that conversation feels familiar, a tone, a reaction, a dynamic, it connects it to past experiences. And suddenly, it's not just one conversation anymore. It's part of a bigger pattern, and that makes it harder to let go. The seventh reason is something deeper. Your brain is trying to protect you. Replaying conversations is a way of scanning for risk. What went wrong? What could go wrong next time? It's not just thinking, it's preparation. And that's why it feels so persistent. Because your brain believes it's doing something important. But here's where things get complicated, because the more you replay something, the less accurate it becomes. You start adding interpretations, assumptions, possibilities that weren't actually there, and the original moment gets lost, replaced by a version built by your thoughts, and that version feels real, even if it isn't. And that's why it's so hard to stop, because you're no longer thinking about what happened, you're thinking about what it might mean, and meaning has no clear ending. But here's the part most people don't realize. The goal of your mind was never to replay everything perfectly. It was to feel certain, to feel safe, to feel like you understand what happened. But understanding everything isn't always possible. And when your brain doesn't get that clarity, it keeps going, looping, searching, trying to finish something that doesn't have a clear answer. And that's why it feels endless, not because there's always something more to find, but because your mind doesn't know when to stop. And that's where the real shift begins. Not by forcing yourself to stop thinking, but by recognizing what your mind is trying to do. It's not attacking you, it's trying to help you, just in a way that no longer works. And once you see that, something starts to change. Because now, you're not inside the loop anymore. You're observing it. And that small difference is where everything begins to shift. And once you start observing it, something subtle begins to happen. The loop doesn't disappear, but it loses intensity, because before, every thought felt like something you had to follow. Now, it's just something you notice. And that changes your role completely. You're no longer trying to solve the conversation, you're watching your mind try to solve it. And that creates space between the thought and your reaction to it. Because here's the truth most people miss. The replay itself isn't the problem, it's what you do with it. If every thought turns into analysis, the loop continues. But if a thought appears and you don't engage with it, it starts to fade. Not instantly, but gradually, like something losing momentum. There's also something else that shifts, your need for certainty. Before, you needed to know what that conversation meant. Now, you start accepting something different, that not every interaction has a clear answer. Not every tone means something deeper. Not every pause needs interpretation. And that realization breaks the cycle, because your mind no longer has to keep searching. There's nothing to solve. There's just something that happened, and that's enough. At first, this feels uncomfortable, because your brain is used to finishing the loop, used to closing every open question. But if you stay with that discomfort, without trying to fix it, something changes. The urge to go back becomes weaker. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped feeding it. And over time, your brain learns something new. That letting go is also safe. That you don't need to replay everything to be okay. And when that happens, the conversations don't disappear from your mind. They just stop pulling you back in. You remember them, but you don't live inside them. And that's the real shift. Not stopping your thoughts completely, but no longer being controlled by them. Because your mind will always try to understand. That's what it does. But now, you get to decide when to follow it and when to let it go. And once you feel that shift, even briefly, you realize something important. You don't actually want to keep going back. Not because the thoughts are wrong, but because they're no longer necessary. The conversation already happened. Nothing changes by replaying it. And for the first time, that feels clear. So instead of going back, you stay here, in the present moment, and that's where your mind finally begins to rest. And the more you choose that, the easier it becomes. Not perfect, but lighter. Until one day, you notice something different. The thought comes back, but you don't follow it. And it passes. And for the first time, that feels enough.